As a perfectionist, a recovering perfectionist, it was definitely, I don't want to admit that this is, I was going to say the F word, but that this is
Yeah.
jacked up. So,
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
letting yourself experience the discomfort of disappointment and knowing that it is not evidence that you are wrong or that you have failed. It is just evidence of being human. The discomfort is so much better than the discomfort of lying to yourself and
Yeah.
pretending and performing.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terry Cole Show. I was talking to someone who's kind of a newer friend, but who was on the show a couple of years ago with her first book, and she has a new book that just came out called Wisdom of the Path: The Beautiful and Bumpy Ride to Healing and Trusting Our Inner Guide. Her name is Yasmine Cheyenne. She is an author, a workshop leader, wellness expert. She's a speaker. I think I met her originally through Selena Sue, maybe one of my pals, and I had seen her on the Today Show. And I just loved her story, such a bright light, that I ended up inviting her on the show when she had her first book come out called The Sugar Jar. She basically helps people heal and live their best lives one day at a time. So she's got meditations, workshops, books, but really she empowers people to create they desire and to actually make it happen ourselves, career, relationship, and lives. Anyway, her book came out. She dropped a bunch of wisdom nuggets here on the Terry Cole Show today. So I hope that you enjoy this interview, this gal pal talk with Yasmine Cheyenne as much as I enjoyed spending time with her. I'm super excited to welcome back to the show Yasmine Cheyenne. Come on back. How are you, Yas?
Hey, thank you for having me.
Woohoo. So many exciting things to talk about. You have a lot going on right now. So 2 weeks ago, your second book came out, right? Because you came on my
Mhm.
pod for your first book, which was amazing.
Yes.
So this book, Wisdom of the Path: The Beautiful and Bumpy Ride to Healing and Trusting Our Inner Guide.
Mhm.
Please tell us all about why this book, why now? Tell me something.
I think after you have been on your healing journey for a while, you start to accumulate all of these experiences that can be one of two things. One, you can use them as evidence that you definitely have what it takes to keep going when things get hard, or you can use it as evidence that you consistently screw up. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of us do the latter. We're
Mm,
incredibly hard on ourselves and we don't even want to take a chance on ourselves. Like, I have so much evidence that I make the wrong choice. Why would I try again? And
yeah.
so, Wisdom of the Path is an invitation to get curious about how those experiences can be used to help you be your fullest self in the present and also get excited again for the future. That doesn't have to be constrained to these specific limits that
Mm,
can be curated by the rule setter, which is you. You are the one setting the rules. You're the one that gets to decide what it looks like moving forward.
love it. So who actually is Wisdom for the Path for? Like, who do you want to read this book and be inspired by this book?
When I originally thought about it, I thought about the person who's starting again. I start the book with my story of being a single mom.
Mm,
The next chapter is about what happened as I was a single mom, grief, losing my grandmother, the person that was like my everything. And so I think sometimes when we're in these phases of loss or grief or whatever, I don't know, they come in families, it happens like a community of losses and trauma and
yeah.
grief tend to travel like clouds, like
Yeah.
the storm's coming and then it moves. And so those folks are definitely going to really see themselves in this book. I don't know anyone who hasn't been experiencing that. If you look around in the world right now in the last 5 to 10 years, like everybody's been going through it. So I feel like it is for everybody, but those folks in particular who are looking forward to what starting again could be like.
What's interesting is that the book is so timely too, even on a sort of a zeitgeist or a collective experience of coming through the pandemic and how
Mm-hmm.
many people decided to start again, were forced to
Mm-hmm.
start again, are still starting again right now because of the
Mm-hmm.
changes that happen. Whether, we're talking about losing loved ones, whether we're talking about loss of income, whether we're talking about, I mean, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of my therapy clients, I felt like it hit people different, but some people, it was, the relationships that they were in, they were spending very limited amount of time together
Mm-hmm.
because we're so busy in life. And that when we got locked down, some people, I felt like in my life, it was it brought my husband and I closer. But, we've been
Mm-hmm.
together 27 years. for a lot of my therapy clients, the cracks that were already there in those
Yeah,
relationships just got exploded open during the pandemic. So I really feel like this book is perfectly appropriate for people sort of still coming out the other side of that.
absolutely. And I think even if you're not in a relationship, I've seen people like finally decide to go for it in their careers. I've seen people finally decide to admit that, you know, the way they've been living their lives has been the way that their families wanted. And it was never what they
Mm.
wanted. People with like, that are doctors, that are lawyers, and
Yep.
are like, I never even wanted this.
Yep.
And so I think it's definitely an invitation to get curious. I think curiosity is kind of where our foundation for grace lives. When we get curious, we're able to kind of approach our past with self-compassion.
Hmm.
When we are judgmental versus curious,
Yep.
self-compassion is not in the room. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it allows people to look at themselves that way as well.
It's interesting. This book has this feeling of like a more gentle, or
Hmm.
there's something about the wisdom of the path, but that includes a gentleness towards self. And
Hmm.
I can tell you for sure, the high functioning women in particular that are in my mastermind group or my crew or my whatever it is, my audience, that this is a really hard lesson to live. They know it. They know they should. They know they want to. They know it'd be better if they were more compassionate. But so many suffer from perfectionism that being compassionate about mistakes is so hard. And I always try to flip it around a little bit to be like, well, if this were your daughter, would you be using
Mm.
that language? Would you be saying it that way? And of course, they're like, hell no, obviously not. I'm like, okay. So, but I think that it's a very timely invitation to look at our past from a compassionate point of view. Deepak Chopra talks about, sort of getting to this level of evolution where we're able to observe ourselves
Hmm.
without judgment, become the
Hmm.
observer without judgment. And again, we take it one step further and say, become the observer with compassion of ourselves, because of course, that's where all the answers of like our own growth are in being able to go,
Right.
huh, well, that was interesting. Why did I experience that way? Or why did I react that way? Tell me a little bit about the differences between The Sugar Jar, your first book, and Wisdom of the Path. Like what is the content wise, what is the difference in the books?
The sugar jar was definitely about boundaries. It was about understanding why we are unable to say no, why we are
Mm-hmm.
unable to honor the boundaries with ourselves, and sort of a beginner's guide to implementing them in your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom of the path is not about boundaries at all, but it's more about the limits that we set within ourselves and within our lives, the societal ideals that we put on ourselves, the way we limit ourselves, but also the way we are actually limited in some ways and how we sometimes allow them to stop us. You know, as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
for example, there's so many things that are happening that can make us feel limited,
Yeah.
or that we can't actually do something that we want to be doing. And so it's finding accessible ways to be able to still go after what we want. And so what I really hope that Wisdom of the Path does, because it is not a rule book or guidebook or checklist, especially
Mm-hmm.
for my recovering perfectionists out there. I'm one of you. I do believe that it asks questions that you may not even sit still long enough to ask yourself
Yeah.
because it is going to allow you to hopefully see yourself in some of my stories. Each chapter is a different story that I've gone through, some of which are wonderful, like towards the end when we get to me finally being able to allow myself to be a little bit freer in my life, and then others that are kind of really hard to walk through. But I think we all have that
Yeah.
spectrum in our lives, but we don't often sit down and look at it. And so that's what
Yes.
this is opening us to.
Right on. So share a little bit. You don't have to, I know each chapter is a different story, but share some of the
Yeah.
real life experiences or realizations that you've had that have inspired you to write Wisdom of the Path, right? What was the big
Yeah.
push, right, to start writing this book? Did something happen? A lot of times there's a precipitating event that gets us to go, I need to write this book.
I was writing the sugar jar actually, and I started writing a chapter that had nothing to do with the sugar jar. And it was because it was answering a lot of the questions that that the reader would have had reading the sugar jar. So after, okay, I set the boundaries, all these relationships ended. I set the boundaries.
Mm.
Now I have to leave this job. I set the boundaries. Now everything is not what you said it would be. So like, how do I start again? And I was like, well, what? And I was answering that question. And then I realized that this is an entire different book. I can't answer this in the sugar jar. First of all, I'm at word count. And second of all, I have so much to say about this. And I realized that I think that's where a lot of us get stuck because we are like, this isn't working the way that I thought it would. And I'm doing this wrong. And it's like, actually, no, this is part of the path. This is a part of the process. We're going to start again as many times as we want, actually.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of the impetus that said, okay, here's the second part of Wisdom of the Path. And I actually started it before the sugar jar even came out. It happened that close to me writing that book.
It's funny. I had a very similar experience with my all the books that I've written. Well, not so many,
Mm-hmm.
but where it's like you write a book and then you find this other thing that you're passionate about. So I wrote Boundary Boss, and then within that, I realized that high functioning codependency is something that there's no way I could possibly cover it in that book. It's a phrase that I coined. It's like a whole thing. I'm like, but it's a whole thing, like, and it needs its own
Mm-hmm.
thing. And from that is also coming out. So that's coming out in October. But then the book after that is about father wounds. And that's basically, it
Mm-hmm.
came to that writing high functioning codependency. It's funny where you dive in and you're like, oh, here are all the topics that are important. And you know exactly that feeling where you go, no, this is important and this is bigger than a chapter.
Mm-hmm.
This has to be
Mm-hmm.
more than that.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for your books, by the way.
Well, thanks. Me too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So for the relationships, you had said certain, you drew boundaries and then certain relationships ended. Where did that leave you, or where does that leave you now with those relationships? Like for you, how did you process that loss?
I mean, a lot of the boundaries that I had to set in terms of losing relationships and things changing and shifting, this is like almost a decade now looking back.
Right.
The beauty of those relationships ending is that it freed me to be able to create the relationships that I want. No one ever wants to hear that when they're like with the partner that they're trying to make it work with and they're like, this is the one and I'm not starting over. I'm not doing it again. I don't want to, but you're already holding on by a string. And most of us don't want to admit that to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We're clinging on. The person is literally praying for us to let go. So I think
Hmm.
that that's what boundaries gives us the freedom to do. It gives us the freedom to see what's actually happening. We're like, for lack of a better term, lying to ourselves for so long and creating
Hmm.
this environment based on hope and fantasy and
Yeah.
dreams that is not real.
Yeah.
And, for myself, I was definitely living in that. And as a perfectionist, a recovering perfectionist, it was definitely, I don't want to admit that this is, you know, I was going to say the F word, but that this is
Yeah.
jacked up. So,
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
letting yourself be disappointed, letting yourself experience the discomfort of disappointment and knowing that it is not evidence that you are wrong or that you have failed. It is just evidence of being human. And that
Yeah.
is going to happen time and time again. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to free them when they really allow themselves to have that experience. The discomfort is so much better than the discomfort of lying to yourself and
Yeah.
pretending and performing and
Yeah.
being someone that you are not in order to make things stick that are far, far, far from okay.
Yeah. And far from good for you. I think that you really, what you
Mm-hmm.
said that will resonate with a lot of people who, you're feeling even then saying, I don't want to start again. I don't want to, like I've already done this.
Mm-hmm.
I spent so much time. It's sort of like throwing good money after bad, or bad money after good, or whatever that saying is, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
the amount of time you have invested doesn't necessarily make it right for you. And I think that it's very hopeful just opening up this dialogue of you can make changes, but that doesn't mean that the second you do, all of the problems are fixed. This is
Right.
part of the process. We have to sometimes lose those relationships and then mourn those relationships, mourn what we wished that marriage or that relationship would have been before we can
Mm-hmm.
create space to create something totally different. All right, I want to shift gears for a second and ask you something. In your life growing up, or in your life,
Mm-hmm.
who believed in you? Who thought you could be a writer? Who thought that you would
Mm-hmm.
do that you could be what you want to become in this world? Was there anyone who was like in your front row?
Definitely my grandmother. She was always enamored with my ability to make a choice and then literally go for it. Like even when I joined the military, it was like, oh, by the way, I went to the recruiter's office today. I leave November. Like there was no plan. I just had the conversation, made the decision, went for it. She would never have done things like that. She actually wrote me a letter talking about I would never have just picked up and left from where I grew up, was born and raised, and decided to go off and do something that I don't even know anything about. And when she wrote me that, it really inspired me and empowered me to always be willing to create change, to not feel like as a woman or as a mom or as a whatever title that we put on ourselves that I'm stuck
Mhm.
where I am. And even today, I still carry it with me because I feel like actually as I get older, the voice can get a little bit more louder and a little bit more judgy. And I have
Mm,
to answer it with a little bit more fire under me. Like, actually, I can do what I really want.
interesting. So that story, right? Just that. What can you walk us through it a little bit? I know for some people it's old history, but it's not for a lot of people listening and watching this on YouTube. So tell us a little bit about joining the military, would you?
Yeah, I joined at 19 and the Air Force. And the beautiful thing about that experience was that I was able to serve as a victim advocate. And when I served as a victim advocate, I supported victims of crime, victims of domestic violence, people who had been through sexual assaults, things like that. And my job was really paperwork, sign here, sign here. And I just transformed that job. Thank God I had a great boss who allowed me to do what I wanted, which is rare in the military. Um, I was like, what happens to people after they go through this? Like, how are we just telling them to sign here and they just kind of, leave? Like, what about the support services? And so I started working with people like you,
Hmm.
therapists, people that were in
Yeah.
these places and providing support to these predominantly women who were going through these and children who were going through these circumstances. And I
Mm,
knew I wanted to be a part of the work. I knew that I had the ability to hold space for really tough experiences that people went through. And someone asked me recently, why didn't you go into therapy? Why didn't you go into
mhm.
psychology? And I knew that I wanted my story and storytelling, my ability to write and tell stories and connect people through that to be a part of the work that I did. And as a therapist, obviously that is not your role. And so
Right.
that's why I also chose that path as well.
So cool. And how did the people in your, well, now we know how your grandmother responded, but how did other people respond with you just sort of taking this bold step at such a young age?
Joining the military or just in
Mhm.
general. I think people
Joined the
thought I was
military.
out of my mind. It was 2006, you know?
Yep.
For those who, who are listening, I think everyone knows it was not a great time to be joining. And oh my God, if my child, my children decided to do something, I couldn't imagine. I mean, I
Hmm.
could not imagine what my mother was thinking. So, I just think that she wanted to support me. She knew that I was doing it. Obviously, it's not something you can take back. There's no take backs. It did actually help me to gain the maturity that I was really lacking. And I mean, obviously I was lacking it. I was 19. We're all lacking it, but,
Exactly.
I wasn't ready for college. And
Mm.
so that helped me be ready for college. And I, graduated from college and got all of the things that you get when you join.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's just amazing because everyone's path is so different, but that's a very specific path and it's not an easy path, especially for women.
Mm-mm.
So I really a lot of props to you for actually doing it. So are there in your life, like I'm always interested in what motivates creatively, what motivates people? Like, are there any writers or books or other resources that sort of inspired you to write this particular book, The Wisdom of the Path?
I am always motivated by Dr. Maya Angelou.
Mm,
I don't know anyone I mean, her word choice, I would say Toni Morrison's a close second, but
yeah.
her word choice, I mean, a sentence is clean. There is no word that could be removed and everyone is chosen intentionally. And so I'm always enamored by the way that she tells a story and is captivating us, in something that's often horrific. She's had a really hard life.
Yes.
But you feel so inspired. I love that about everyone's story. I don't think that I would ever write a memoir per se, but a lot of my books do have a memoir-esque appeal to them because I feel like we tell through our own story, but I would love to be a part of helping others tell their own story. That inspires me hearing how other people
Mhm.
persevered and survived.
Yeah, I find it the whole memoir esque, as you said, because similar the
Hmm.
stuff that I write, that I find it so interesting, and it's
Hmm.
always in you sharing your stories in your books that there's this identification where we go, oh, if she can do it, I can do it. Or if she had this experience, because
Hmm.
I also can, especially being a therapist, I find that people have a tendency to do a lot of projection onto like your perfect life and my perfect life and how we had it all figured out. You know, we were like, yeah, as we were just talking before we actually flipped on the cameras, we're both like, no, uh,
No.
we do not have, most people do not have it figured out. We are figuring it out. And to a degree, stressing about a book launch is a high class problem, right? Or, feeling tired from doing the things that we love to do. But there is a whole process of writing. And I can only say personally that writing this last book that comes out in October, it was for me this time around, it was a very stressful process. And
Hmm.
when it was at its very worst, I was like, yeah, I definitely don't want to do this again. But then I also am committed to doing another book, so I guess I am going to do it again. But I wonder for you, do you have a, for the creatives in the crew, what is your process of writing a book? Right? Was it different than the Sugar Jar? Was this book in particular, was it different or was it the same? And what does your routine look like? Because I know we all do it differently, but I'm always curious to see how other writers do it.
Yeah. So the first book poured out of me. That was just like 6 months done, easy, quote unquote. It was not easy, but I felt like I
Yeah.
had been writing that book for some time. It was like
Yeah.
the work that I was teaching. And so it was easy to come out. The second book
Yeah.
was more of a battle. The work was still there and the words were still there. But I think
Yep.
my life started to become the book. And still very much feel that. I feel like
Hmm.
the work that I was writing started to show up in my life. And so I was living it. It was a very Twilight Zone experience. It is a very Twilight Zone experience. And so
Wait,
that
can you
made it
say
really,
can you say more about that piece, please?
yes. It felt like I was in another dimension. When I
Hmm.
say like I was living someplace else, writing and teaching this work for people to experience. And then as I wrote it, it was starting to manifest in real time.
Yes.
And I know I'm not the only author who's gone through this. And I'm writing from the past. So what I'm writing in the book is something that I've already gone through, but like it's coming back for like a second or third or fourth run. And I'm just like, I don't even know that I want to go through this next chapter. Every chapter I write is going to show up. I am grateful that my books do that though. I am
Yeah.
grateful that I am a living testament to what I'm writing. I am grateful
Yes.
that I am practicing what I'm preaching. I
Yeah.
think that is the hardest part though, being the walking symbol of the type of work that you and I are writing.
I know. It's there's something about the parallel process though that you're
Mhm.
describing. And actually, yes, I have not, I don't know if other people have this experience. And I haven't even talked about my experience with it really. I mean, with Boundary Boss, I did, meaning that I was required. Like
Mhm.
I thought it was a Boundary Boss before I wrote that effing book. Do you know what I mean? Writing that effing book made me go, all of these boundary challenges just in
Yeah.
my face, having to fight for what I wanted with the publisher, and they're lovely, they're
Mhm.
they're great, right? But me, first time authors, having to assert
Mhm.
like, no, it
Mhm.
really needs to be this way, and they're like, no, we know that's not the
Mhm.
right cover. I'm like, no, I'm having my own designer do the cover because
Mhm.
it's got to be right, and I'm the only one who knows what the
Mhm.
cover is. But I say that now very confidently to you.
Mhm.
It took me twisting myself up in a pretzel, trying to figure out how do I deliver that. Like I was trying to placate them and be nice about it and look at all the different versions that they gave and you know, and then finally it just came
Yeah.
down to, here's the thing. It has to be the right thing. So I was in that position of just feeling like there are boundary challenges and invitations and
Mhm.
violations along the way. And with writing this book on high functioning codependency, just the same exact shit was happening. But your description of living in the Twilight Zone is exactly how it felt. I was like, where the am I? What is
Yes,
happening right now? Yes.
it is. I would imagine if you're an artist, you're painting out something and it's happening. I do believe that for creatives, a lot of time they say art imitates life. I have had the opposite experience. Life is imitating my art, and it's crazy. For the creatives who are listening,
Yeah.
allow my favorite quote. I keep saying this in every interview, but it's in the book. Clarissa Pinkola says, the author of Women Who Run with
Yeah.
Wolves,
Sure.
fantastic book if you haven't read it. She talks about the doors that are available in our lives and how every experience that is happening is an opportunity. It is a door that we can walk through that can allow us to get a little bit closer to ourselves, experience something closer to ourselves. And I just really feel that that's what that is for me. I don't always want to walk through that door though. I just want to write this chapter.
Yeah.
I've lived it, but
Ah,
I'm realizing, especially with a lot of the things I went through recently, the
yeah.
door is opening for me to have an experience that I would not have chosen because I am stubborn and I'm an Aries and I need sometimes the experience to help me really like lean in so that I can receive, so that I can be softer, so that I can really be in my fullness. So
Yes.
yeah.
I'm an Aries too. It's funny. I feel like I knew I liked you. So how do you let's get into the balance of it all because we're talking about doing a lot. So how do you balance being basically a full-time author, wellness
hmm
expert, and self-healing guide and all the things that you do? Like what is your way of having enough filling up your own bucket?
I'm really practicing having more time to myself. There are so many opportunities. I'm sure you get so many opportunities. I get so many opportunities. It's been really beautiful lately, passing those opportunities on to other people who are in my field, who I love, who are just as capable as I am,
Yep,
and giving it, like literally handing it to someone else, not just saying no, but saying, I know the perfect person.
exactly.
That has been
Facilitating.
Yes, that has been freeing for me. When an opportunity comes that I know not that it isn't for me, I know that I'm just a vessel for it to be for someone else. And that I've been practicing that.
That's beautiful. And what about self-care routines or anything like that?
Self-care recently has been a lot of outside time. I mean, my dream is to have like a farm with cows and all that stuff. I think you have chickens, don't you?
Chickens and geese and a dog and a
Yeah,
rooster.
that would be a dream. But right now I'm just really allowing myself to walk in my neighborhood and be outside and go to the water as often as I can.
Yeah.
Very accessible self-care at the moment.
Yes.
hmm
I feel like a lot of times there's a lot of complicated stuff. So I love that you're saying that because we make it complicated. We make self care like another,
hmm
pardon my French, another thing you got to check a box that you're like, oh, Jesus, like I do not feel like doing this. Being outside, walking, I
hmm
spend the same. I actually make sure that I spend some time outside. I have a 250-year-old tree in my backyard that's like
Oh, that's
big.
amazing.
Oh, it's so gorgeous. So I go out when the grass is still wet with my dog. I will hug my tree. I will spend a little time out there. Even if it's a day where I'm not going to get much time outside. I
hmm
also had a studio built in my house last year, so it was total hell, but it's done. And it's all windows. So right now I'm talking to you, but I'm looking outside and I can see my chickens and I can see my, like I feel like I'm
Yeah.
I'm surrounded. I always say it like I feel like I'm always like snuggling up to her, like spooning nature on a daily basis,
hmm
which really adds to I feel like my own mental wellness.
hmm I love that. I love that. And I feel like, if you're like me who grew up in a city, 10th floor of a multi-building,
Mhm.
concrete, there's none of that, you know, I would go outside in my city and I would walk and I put my, headphones on if I wanted to, like find nature, find connection, find what helps
Yeah,
you feel supported in any way that you can. But there is something about being outside. There's nothing like it.
yeah.
So,
So true.
yeah.
All right, I have one last question for you
Okay.
about boundaries. And I may have asked you
hmm
this before, but I don't think I did. Personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle, and how did you overcome it, if you indeed have?
I have overcome it, allowing other people to live their own lives.
Mm.
I am the type of person that I see what's best. I know you can do it. Let me help. And no one has asked me, like, no one asked you, Yas. And I have learned to mind my business. I have learned to just be a supportive friend and go on whatever journey they want to go on with them.
Mm.
And it has freed me. And it probably, I would imagine they would say it has improved our relationships
Oh,
because
yeah.
who wants someone constantly telling them what's best? I thought I wanted the best for them. What's best for them is their decision. So yeah.
That's you're literally talking about being in recovery from high functioning codependency,
Hmm.
where we are so capable, we are so smart, we do have all the answers though, but it's not the healthiest thing to tell other people that we have all the answers for them. And
Hmm.
what is required, that's such a beautiful share, what is required for you to do that,
Hmm.
just from the outside looking in, is being able to tolerate the way that their good or bad decision making ability makes you feel, right? When people are
Yeah.
about to make some bad decisions, you want to be like, don't do it.
Yep. Leave them, end it.
Leave them.
And it's like, oh man, she has to go through that. I'm just gonna have to watch. I'm gonna be there.
Yes,
And obviously if someone's, harming themselves or something like that is different, but we're talking about the everyday, like,
sure.
you just gotta be there. Yeah.
You do. You guys, if you are just tuning in, the author is Yasmine Cheyenne, and the book is called Wisdom of the Path, The Beautiful and Bumpy Ride to Healing and Trusting Our Inner Guide. You can get it everywhere fine books are sold. Support your local bookshops if you want to. Go get it on Amazon. It's all over the place. Guys, tell us where we can find you.
Yes, you can find me on Instagram, Yasmin Cheyenne. It's the same
Yes.
as my website as well.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for spending time with us today and for what you're putting out
Thanks
into
for
the world. I
having
really
me.
appreciate you.
Thank you.